The anniversary dinner at Maison Elegance was supposed to mark 10 years together, but the diamond tennis bracelet on Sophia's wrist didn't come from her husband. It flashed in the candlelight right as her phone vibrated on the white tablecloth, and she smiled at the message while acting like the man across from her barely existed. There's a certain kind of silence that's louder than any argument, the kind that tells you a marriage is dying before the check even hits the table. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was kept at a perfect, museum-level chill, but that night, surrounded by crystal glasses clinking and the low buzz of Manhattan's wealthy crowd, I could feel that cold settling into my bones. I stood beside a massive Egyptian pillar, slowly swirling the scotch in my glass, keeping my eyes on my wife. Sophia was about 20 feet away, stunning in emerald silk that clung to her like it was made just for her. She laughed, smooth, rehearsed, almost musical, tilting her head back just enough to show that long, elegant line of her throat. A tight circle of investors and media powerhouses hovered around her like she was their sun, and she shined so brightly it left me on the outside. I never minded standing in the shadows. As a landscape architect, I always preferred quiet work, stone, soil, order, over the loud, restless energy of these fancy events. But that night felt different. That night, the shadows didn't feel peaceful. They felt like bars. She's in her element, isn't she? I turned and saw Dylan, an old college buddy who'd become a corporate attorney, standing beside me. His eyes didn't leave Sophia, and his face looked careful, like he was measuring his words. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my chest felt tight. "She is. It's a big night for her firm," Dylan said, then hesitated. He lowered his voice, swirling his drink like he didn't want to say what he was about to say. "I saw her earlier, near the cloakroom, with Nathan Pierce." Hearing that name hit me like someone had shoved a fist into my ribs. Nathan Pierce, the real estate giant bankrolling the Hudson Yards expansion. It was the same project Sophia was helping promote, and the same one I'd put in a bid for just the week before. Nathan had the kind of charm that didn't feel friendly, it felt dangerous. He was predatory, smooth, and so rich it probably made basic morals feel optional. "They're just talking strategy," I said, even though the words tasted like dust in my mouth. "Nathan's a tough client." "Right," Dylan said, clearly not buying it. He patted my shoulder, and it wasn't a friendly gesture, it was heavy, loaded with pity. "Just keep your eyes open, buddy." I watched him walk away, and then my gaze went right back to Sophia. She wasn't laughing anymore. She was staring at her phone, her thumb moving across the screen like she was touching something fragile, like she cared. And the worst part was how familiar that tenderness felt, because she hadn't shown it to me in months. She typed out a quick reply, her mouth pulling into a small, private smile, and then slipped the phone back into her clutch. All of a sudden, the noise around me, the quartet, the chatter, the laughter, felt unbearable. I needed air. I set my half-finished drink on a waiter's tray as he passed and started pushing my way through the crowd. I planned to find Sophia, tell her I had a headache, and ask if we could just go home. That's when I saw that emerald dress disappear through the French doors leading to the terrace overlooking Central Park. Outside, it was barely 20 degrees. No one else was out there. So I followed. I cracked the heavy glass door open, and the icy wind slapped my face hard enough to make my eyes water. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. In the darkness near the stone balustrade, two bodies stood close enough to share breath. Sophia was backed against the railing, gripping her shawl tight. And looming over her, blocking the wind with his body like he belonged there, was Nathan Pierce. He wasn't talking business. His hand rested on her waist like it had every right to be there, and his fingers slipped beneath the silk of her dress, touching the bare skin at her lower back like it was normal. I stopped cold. My breath caught, and fog spilled from my mouth into the night air. "He's boring, Nathan," Sophia said, and her voice drifted through the thin crack of the door, clear as glass and sharp as a blade. "He's safe. That's why I married him. But safety gets exhausting." Nathan let out a low laugh, deep and satisfied. He leaned in, his lips brushing near her ear. And what am I? You, Sophia whispered, turning her face and kissing along his jaw, are the danger I deserve. I couldn't move. The betrayal didn't feel like a bomb going off. It was slower than that, like something heavy pressing down, stealing the air from my lungs little by little. And it wasn't only that she was cheating. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, like I was some old piece of furniture she was sick of wiping down. I watched Nathan pull her closer until their bodies blended into one dark shape against the glow of the city. My grip clamped down on that brass door handle so hard my knuckles went ghost white. I could have stormed out there. I could have yelled. I could have swung on him. But as I stood there watching my wife fold into another man's arms, something hit me like ice water. She wouldn't care. My fingers loosened slowly, and the door eased shut with a soft, quiet click. Then I turned and walked right back into the warm noise of the gala. That picture, her with him, was burned into my eyes, and her voice, dismissing my entire existence, kept replaying in my head like a cruel echo. I didn't go home. I went to the bar. Even the ride back later felt like suffocation. We sat in the back of the town car, and even though there were only 6 inches of leather between us, it felt like miles. Sophia scrolled on her main phone, the blue screen lighting up that small, satisfied smile she'd worn ever since the balcony. She quietly hummed under her breath, something classical, light, almost cheerful. She figured I was drunk. She assumed my silence was just me being tired, the tiredness of a man who didn't understand the world she lived in. When we stepped into our Tribeca penthouse, the apartment was dead quiet, and the silence pressed down like the air right before a storm breaks. I'm going to wash this city off me, Sophia said, kicking her heels off by the foyer console. She didn't even glance at me. She didn't ask why I'd left early, or why I hadn't said a single word for 40 minutes. She simply floated toward the master bathroom, that emerald silk whispering as she walked, dry and soft like rustling leaves. I stood in the center of the living room and listened as the water started running. The shower spray hit the marble in a steady rhythm, like a drumbeat. Then I finally moved. I didn't head for the liquor cabinet. I went straight to the bedroom, walking quietly across the thick carpet. My eyes locked onto her vanity. For months I'd noticed how she guarded the bottom drawer without even thinking about it, standing in front of it while she dressed, sliding it closed too quickly whenever I walked in. Back then, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Now I understood it wasn't paranoia at all. It was instinct. I pulled the drawer open. Inside were silk scarves and velvet jewelry pouches, layered neatly like everything else in her life. I shoved my hand beneath the fabric, digging deeper, until my fingers hit something cold and solid, technology. I pulled it out. An iPhone. Older model. Black. Sleek. A burner phone. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. What I felt instead was cold and clinical, like I'd turned into a surgeon about to cut someone open. I pressed the home button. No passcode. Of course not. She was arrogant. She honestly believed I was too decent, too weak, to ever look. The screen lit up in the dim room, bright enough to sting my eyes. A single message thread was open. The contact name was just one letter, J. I scrolled upward, reading every word, swallowing each sentence as it dismantled me piece by piece. The gala is suffocating. I need you. Sophia had sent that at 8:15 p.m. Meet me on the terrace. Nathan's reply came right after. Leave the architect inside. Bile climbed up my throat, but I forced it back down. I kept reading anyway. I needed it to hurt enough that I couldn't lie to myself later. I needed it deep, deep enough that it couldn't be patched up. I scrolled further back, weeks, then months. He's planning a weekend in the Hamptons for our anniversary, Sophia wrote 3 weeks earlier. God, he's so predictable. It's pathetic, really. He looks at me with those puppy dog eyes and I just want to scream. Nathan replied, leave him. I will. Once the portfolio is secured. He's useful for the domestic image, for now. Plus, I'd miss the penthouse. Then the line that stuck in my chest like a nail, but he's so small, Nathan. Next to you, he's invisible. Invisible. I lowered the phone slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. That one word floated in the air heavier than any accusation. And it wasn't just the sex. Yeah, the photos were brutal, explicit, intimate, taken in hotels I'd paid for without even knowing what I was funding. But the pictures weren't what killed me. The messages did. Because she didn't only want another man. She hated me. She saw my kindness as weakness. My loyalty as stupidity. The shower shut off. I shoved the burner phone back under the scarves, buried it the way I found it, and slid the drawer closed just as the bathroom door handle started to turn. I stepped away fast, moving toward the shadows near the window, my back turned to the room like I was just staring out at the city. Sophia walked in wearing a white robe, towel drying her hair. The air filled with that expensive jasmine soap smell, something I used to connect with home. Now it smelled like a lie. You're still up, she asked, flat and indifferent. She sat down at the vanity, right above the drawer where the proof of her betrayal was hidden, and calmly started rubbing night cream into her skin. You really should go to bed, Caleb, she said. You look awful. I stared at her reflection in the mirror, that calm, gorgeous face of a woman who could wreck a man completely, and then gently tell him to get some sleep like she was doing him a favor. I'm just thinking, I said. Even to me, my voice sounded strange, rough, empty, like it didn't belong in my throat anymore. Don't think too hard, she said casually, wiping a tiny smudge off her cheek. It doesn't suit you. I stood behind her, staring at her back. The anger I'd had boiling inside me wasn't rising anymore. It was cooling. Hardening into something sharper, something brittle, almost dangerous. I wasn't going to scream. Not tonight. Tonight, I wanted to watch the act one more time, and then end it. No, I whispered at the mirror, even though she didn't hear me. It doesn't. I stayed in the room. I didn't walk away. I didn't retreat. Instead, I stepped up to the vanity, moving stiffly like my body was pushing through deep water. I opened the drawer. Sophia sucked in a quick breath, sharp and sudden. I ignored it. I pulled the black phone out and set it down carefully on the marble counter, right beside her expensive jar of La Mer. The second that phone hit the countertop, her reflection changed. Her hand froze in mid-motion. The bored look in her eyes disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Not fear, annoyance. Like I'd inconvenienced her. She still didn't turn around. She just stared at the phone in the mirror, then lifted her eyes to meet mine through the glass. So, she said, her voice dropping lower, losing that sweet, musical tone. You've been digging. I saw you on the balcony, I said. My voice cracked. The words came out broken, jagged, like the room itself was splitting down the middle. I saw you with Nathan. I read the messages, Sophia. Invisible, is that what I am? Sophia let out a long, exhausted sigh, like I'd just asked her to take the trash out instead of catching her with another man. She screwed the lid back onto the cream jar slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. I told Nathan you wouldn't understand, she muttered. Then she finally spun around on the stool to face me. She pulled her robe tighter, crossed her legs, and looked at me like a queen holding court, not like a wife caught cheating. This, she said calmly, is exactly what I meant. You don't have the stomach for how the world really works. How the world works. I stared at her, shocked. We've been married 10 years. I built this life with you. I could barely believe the words coming out of her mouth. I supported you when you were just an intern fetching coffee. And you call me small, to a guy who treats people like assets? He treats people like adults, Sophia snapped. He takes what he wants. Then she glanced over me like she was inspecting something cheap. He has ambition. And you? Her lip curled. You're satisfied drawing pretty little gardens. You're safe, she said. You're boring. And you're nice. She said the word nice like it was disgusting, like it was an insult. I loved you, I whispered. Even saying it in the past tense hit me hard. It didn't feel like sadness washing over me. It felt like a wall slamming down, crushing me beneath the truth of how little she cared. I thought we were partners. We were, she said with a shrug, until I outgrew you. She sighed again, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. I didn't want to hurt you, Caleb. I just wanted more. I need someone who matches my altitude. Nathan gets me. He sees the power in me, she continued. You only see the wife you want to protect. A tear slid out of my eye before I could stop it, hot and humiliating. I tried to wipe it away fast, but my hands shook. I felt exposed, stripped raw in front of the one person who was supposed to have my back. The pain wasn't just emotional anymore. It felt physical, like a knife twisting in my gut. How can you just sit there and say that? My voice trembled. Does this mean nothing to you? Do I mean nothing? Sophia watched me. She watched my chest rise and fall. Watched that single tear drag through the stubble on my cheek. Watched my hands shaking at my sides. And then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real one, open, bright, and cruel. She shook her head and looked up toward the ceiling like she was sharing a joke with the universe. Oh my God, she choked out, still laughing. Look at you. You're actually crying, she said, like she couldn't believe it. Like a child. Then she stood up and brushed past me like I was nothing, like I was just some piece of furniture in her way. At the doorway, she stopped and glanced back. Her eyes held no sympathy. No regret. Only amusement. This is why I cheated, Caleb, she said, her voice dry now, the laughter fading into a smug little smirk. Because I need a man, not a martyr. Then she pointed toward the hall without even looking. Sleep in the guest room. We'll talk about the divorce terms once you're done feeling sorry for yourself. Then she walked out and flipped off the light, leaving me standing there in the dark. The sound of her laughter stayed behind with me, echoing in my ears louder than any scream ever could. I didn't go to the guest room. I just stood there in the darkness of the master bedroom for a long time, listening to the apartment breathe and settle like it always did at night. I could hear the distant hum of the sub-zero refrigerator, the faint creak of floorboards relaxing, and the soft, steady breathing of the woman who had just laughed at me like I was nothing. And somewhere in that quiet, something inside me broke. Not with a crash. Not with drama. It snapped in silence, like a rope being cut. The grief that had been crushing me just minutes earlier didn't slowly fade. It vanished. In its place came a kind of clarity so sharp it felt like ice water flooding my veins. She wanted strength, I realized. She wanted me to stop being nice. Fine. I moved through the penthouse like a ghost. I didn't bother turning on a single light. The faint glow from the Manhattan skyline spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows gave me all the visibility I needed. I went into my study, my one safe place in that apartment, and opened my laptop. Because I wasn't just some guy who designed gardens. I was a businessman. I logged into our joint accounts. For years, I'd let Sophia handle the lifestyle spending while I handled the investments. I stared at the numbers on the screen, millions of dollars representing a decade of my work poured into the life she proudly wore like designer clothing. My fingers didn't shake. I started making transfers, one after another. I didn't drain the accounts. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't trying to be the villain in her story. But I moved exactly 50% of our liquid assets into a private holding account I'd opened years ago for a project that never got off the ground. I left her the penthouse. I left her the stock holdings tied to her firm. I took what was mine, my liquidity and my freedom. When I was done, I closed the laptop and slid it into my leather messenger bag. Next came my sketchbooks. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't pack toiletries. I didn't even take the Patek Philippe she'd given me on my 30th birthday. I left that watch sitting on the desk. It was too heavy anyway. Then I walked into the kitchen. The marble island sat there gleaming under the pendant lights, spotless and beautiful, like everything in Sophia's world always had to be. This was where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. This was where I'd stupidly believed we were building something real. I looked down at my left hand. The platinum wedding band felt wrong now, like a shackle pretending to be jewelry. I slid it off slowly. The skin underneath was pale, almost white, like a stripe of flesh that hadn't seen sunlight in 10 years. I placed the ring right in the center of the island. Then I grabbed a notepad. The pen hovered over the paper while my mind searched for words. I could have written a defense. I loved you. Or an accusation. You're cruel. Or even a warning. He will break you. But then it hit me, any sentence I left behind would be a gift. It would prove she still mattered enough to me that I needed her to read my pain. And Sophia lived off attention. Even bad attention fed her. Silence was the only thing she couldn't twist or control. So I capped the pen and set it down. No note. I picked up my bag and headed for the front door. I didn't glance back down the hallway toward the bedroom. I didn't check to see if she was waking up. The person sleeping in that bed wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger. I opened the heavy steel door and stepped into the hallway outside. The corridor was completely silent. When the latch clicked shut behind me, the sound felt violent, like a gunshot in a quiet building. I rode the elevator down 40 floors. In the lobby, the night doorman, Gavin, looked half asleep, but he jolted upright when he saw me. "Mr. Warner," he asked, startled. "Everything okay? You're leaving, now. It's 3 o'clock in the morning." "Yes, Gavin," I said. And for the first time that entire night, my voice was perfectly calm. I didn't sound like a man who'd been destroyed. I sounded like a man who'd finally woken up after being asleep for years. "I'm heading out early." Then I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the biting New York cold. I didn't flag down a cab to a hotel. I flagged one to JFK. As the taxi rolled away from the building, I stared out the back window. The penthouse windows stayed dark. By the time Sophia woke up, noticed the empty space beside her, and saw my ring sitting on the counter, I'd already be 30,000 feet in the air, cutting across the country and wiping myself off her skyline for good. The rain in Washington state wasn't anything like the rain in New York. Back in Manhattan, rain was mostly an annoyance, dirty water kicking up behind taxi tires, slush collecting along the curb like gray trash. But out here, 3,000 miles away, and 3 years later, rain felt alive. It fell in a constant, steady rhythm against the canopy of the temperate rainforest, like a drumbeat that didn't make things messier, it made them clean. I stood on the cantilever deck of the structure that had swallowed my life for the last 36 months, watching mist creep up off the Puget Sound. I didn't look like the man in that tuxedo anymore. The clean-shaven guy with the soft jaw was gone. In his place stood someone else, flannel, muddy work boots, and a trimmed beard already streaked with gray that showed up too early. My hands had changed too. They used to be smooth, the hands of a man who only held drafting pens and blueprints. Now they were rough and calloused from hauling timber and working the wood myself. I took a slow sip of black coffee, keeping my eyes on the fog rolling over the water. Behind me, the sliding glass doors of the Solace Center stood open. That building was my masterpiece. A trauma recovery retreat designed not to look like a clinic, but like it belonged in the forest, like it had grown out of the ground. I'd built it with raw concrete, reclaimed cedar, and huge sheets of glass meant to erase the line between safe indoors and wild outdoors. Solace wasn't just a project. It was proof of healing. Strength built straight into the broken parts. Caleb. I didn't flinch. I just turned slowly. Lena stood in the doorway holding a tablet. She was my studio manager, sharp, young, no nonsense. She knew almost nothing about the man I'd been before. All she knew was I paid well, and I didn't talk much. The committee called, she said, and her voice sounded higher than usual. She was trying not to smile. I turned back toward the mist like I already knew where this was going. And? I asked. They're not asking for revisions, Caleb, she said, and the grin finally pushed through. They're giving you the Prism Award. The Solace Project. It won, she added. Unanimously. I watched a hawk glide in a wide circle under the gray sky. The Prism Award. In architecture, it was basically the Oscars. It meant magazine covers. It meant world attention. It meant my face and my name would end up splashed across every major design journal and lifestyle website on the planet, right down to the one sitting on coffee tables in Upper East Side penthouses. Turn it down, I said softly. I can't, Lena replied, stepping onto the deck while the rain dampened her hair. They already released the press packet. She checked her watch. The article goes live in New York in 10 minutes. Then she read the headline out loud, almost like she couldn't believe it, The Architect of Silence, Caleb Warner's masterpiece of grief and redemption. I shut my eyes. For a second, I felt a phantom ache in my ring finger, the same place I hadn't worn a band in over a year. I'd come here to vanish. I'd come here to prove, if only to myself, that I wasn't small. I poured my pain into that foundation. Every beam, every angle, every detail was my answer to the laughter that still crawled into my nightmares. I wanted to be great. I just hadn't understood that greatness would force me to be seen again. They also want you in New York, Lena said more gently now. For the Hudson Riverfront revitalization. I opened my eyes. They saw the drone footage of this place, she continued, and they fired their lead firm. They want the guy who built Solace. The Hudson Riverfront. That used to be Nathan Pierce's playground. I watched the hawk dive suddenly, slicing into the tree line with deadly precision. I wasn't the man who ran in the middle of the night anymore. I rebuilt myself out here, in cold air and endless rain. And I learned something important: silence wasn't weakness. Silence was a weapon, if you knew how to use it. Book the flight, I said. My voice came out rough, but solid. Lena blinked. For the award ceremony? No. I turned and faced her fully, and for the first time in 3 years, something hard flashed in my eyes, something dangerous. Cold fire. For the meeting, I said. If New York wants the architect of silence, I'll give them exactly what they're asking for. The lunchtime rush at Le Cuckoo was deafening. Silverware clattered. Voices overlapped. Everyone talked business like the whole restaurant was one big networking event. But Sophia barely heard any of it. For her, it all felt distant, like she was underwater. 3 years ago, she would have been at the center table, dominating the room like a queen. Today, she sat alone near the kitchen door, waiting for a man who was now 40 minutes late. She checked her phone for the 5th time. Still nothing from Nathan. Her thumb hovered over Nathan's contact name. She wanted to text him, "Where are you?" But her pride wouldn't let her. That pride was already battered, bruised, and squeezing tight in her chest. And deep down, she knew the truth anyway. The balance between them had changed months ago. The danger she once craved in Nathan didn't feel exciting anymore. It had rotted into something uglier, cruelty. He stopped picking up her calls. He stopped showing up. He forgot dates like she didn't matter. And now he treated her with that same dismissive, amused indifference she used to throw at Caleb like it was nothing. A waiter stepped up with an apologetic look on his face. "Madam. Mr. Pierce's assistant just called. He won't be able to make it. Something about closing a deal." Heat rushed up Sophia's neck and into her cheeks. It wasn't just being rejected. It was being rejected in public. She nodded like she didn't care, forcing her face to stay calm. "Fine," she said. "Bring the check." The waiter hesitated, then added, "Mr. Pierce already took care of the bill." That wasn't kindness. It was a payoff. A dismissal. "I'm not eating with you, but here's some money so you don't cause a scene." Sophia grabbed her purse and walked out with her chin high, pretending she couldn't hear the whispers she imagined behind her. But the truth was worse than whispers. Nobody was watching her at all. After the divorce, her reputation had slipped. Clients liked stable publicists, not women whose personal lives had turned into gossip column entertainment. And without Caleb's quiet, reliable income helping carry the weight of that penthouse, the mortgage and maintenance fees were slowly bleeding her dry. She was running on credit cards and sheer denial. Outside, the wind cut hard as she stepped onto the sidewalk, blowing her hair across her face. She raised her hand and flagged a cab. Ubers were surging, and she had to start paying attention to her limits now. Inside the taxi, she scrolled through industry news just to keep her mind busy, anything to stop herself from thinking. Then a headline in the New York Times real estate section caught her eye. A sleek render of the new Hudson Riverfront Park filled the screen. It was a project Nathan had obsessed over, one that had been frozen for years because nobody could agree on a design. The headline made her stomach drop. "The Return of Silence, award-winning architect Caleb Warner takes lead on Hudson project." Sophia froze. She didn't even breathe for a second. Her finger tapped the link, and her hand started to tremble. The photo wasn't of the park. It was Caleb. But it wasn't the Caleb she remembered. This man wore a dark turtleneck and a charcoal coat, standing in front of gray mist and raw timber. He looked older, but not in a tired way. He looked sharpened. Hardened. His eyes, once warm and pleading, stared into the camera with an intensity that was almost unsettling. And he looked expensive. Sophia read the article slowly. After a 3-year hiatus in the Pacific Northwest, where his Solace project redefined therapeutic architecture, Warner returns to Manhattan. When asked about his new vision for the city, Warner stated, "New York is a city of noise. I intend to build the quiet." The irony landed like a punch. She left him because he was too quiet. Too invisible. And now the entire city couldn't stop talking about him. Her phone buzzed again. Instagram notification. A post from a 22-year-old influencer, swimwear model. The photo showed a diamond bracelet, almost identical to the one Sophia had worn years ago, resting on a wrist in the passenger seat of a Ferrari Sophia instantly recognized. The caption read, "New toys. Thank you, Nate." Sophia's hand went limp. The phone dropped into her lap. The cab hit a pothole, shaking her body like it was trying to rattle her bones loose. She stared out the window at the city sliding past. She had traded a man who would have died for her, for a man who treated women like leased cars. She was 35, alone, drowning in debt. And the husband she had mocked for being small was returning to rebuild the very skyline she still lived under. She didn't cry. She was too stunned for tears. She just sat there with that sick, hollow feeling, the terrifying realization of a woman who understands, all at once, that she threw away the only thing in her life that was real. The unveiling for the Hudson Riverfront project was held inside a glass pavilion that cantilevered out over the water, temporary, glamorous, and so expensive it probably cost more than most people earned in 10 years. The room was packed with the same predators that filled the gala 3 years earlier: investors, critics, socialites. But the mood wasn't the same. They weren't circling each other anymore. They were circling Caleb. Caleb stood near the scale model of his design. No drink in hand. No forced conversation. His hands were clasped behind his back as he listened to a city councilman praise his visionary restraint. His face gave nothing away. The beard he'd grown in Washington was gone now, or at least trimmed close, shaping his jaw into something that looked carved out of granite. He didn't look like a man searching for approval. He carried himself like a man who didn't seek approval anymore. He looked like the man who decided what was approved. Across the city, up in the penthouse that was now 3 months behind on maintenance fees, Sophia stood in front of her mirror and studied her reflection. She'd spent 2 full hours getting ready. She picked a midnight blue dress, modest, classy, almost innocent. It was the kind of dress she used to wear back when Caleb first met her. Not the version of herself she turned into when Nathan came into the picture. Her makeup went on like armor. Every brushstroke was careful, almost surgical, covering the dark shadows beneath her eyes and hiding the stress lines that had appeared once the credit card company started blowing up her phone. She had to get into that pavilion. She needed to see Caleb. She'd called Dylan 3 times. The first 2 calls went straight to voicemail. The third time, he finally answered, already sounding tired of her. "Sophia. I really don't think this is a good idea," he said with a long sigh. "I'm his wife, Dylan," she said. It was a lie, said softly, with just enough shakiness in her voice to make it sound sad instead of manipulative. "Technically, the papers were never finalized," she added. I want to congratulate him. I owe him that. Please." She could hear Dylan hesitate on the other end. Dylan was a lawyer. He knew what the legal truth was. But he also remembered the Caleb from years back, the man who wouldn't slam the door in someone's face even if they deserved it. Finally, Dylan spoke again, and his voice was colder. "Fine," he said. "I'll leave your name at the door. But don't make a scene, Sophia." Then he paused, like he didn't even want to say the next part. "He's different now." 20 minutes later, Sophia was walking into the unveiling event. The doorman checked the list and saw her name. His eyes flickered for a second, recognition, not respect, and then he lifted the velvet rope. Sophia stepped inside. Cold air conditioning hit her skin immediately, and with it came the memory of that night, the night she burned her own marriage to the ground. Only this time, she was the one shaking. She scanned the pavilion, ignoring the side glances, the quiet judgment from women who knew everything. The affair. Nathan dumping her. The public fall. None of them mattered. She wasn't there for them. She was there for Caleb. Then she saw him. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, alone for a brief moment, staring out at the Hudson River stretched out black in the night. The lighting cast a soft glow around him, almost like a halo. He looked strong. And somehow, lonely. A twisted kind of hope surged up inside her. "He's alone," she thought. "He did all of this because of me. This is him proving he can be the man I always wanted." She adjusted the dress at her waist, grabbed a glass of champagne to steady her hands, and started walking toward him. She practiced what she'd say in her head. She'd keep her voice soft. She'd sound sorry. She'd touch his arm, lightly, the way she used to when she needed something. She'd bring him back to the good years, before Nathan, before the burner phone in the vanity drawer. She was only 10 feet away when he turned. At first, he didn't even notice her. His eyes moved across the crowd with that detached, bored calm, like none of it impressed him. Then his gaze landed on her. Sophia stopped. She was ready for anger. She was ready for hurt. She was even ready for that wounded look he had the last night in the bedroom, like a loyal dog that didn't understand why it was being kicked. But Caleb didn't react. Not even a flicker. His pulse didn't jump. His posture didn't change. His expression didn't crack. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the architectural model a moment earlier, polite, mildly interested, and completely detached. There was no history in his eyes. He didn't step away. He didn't step forward either. He just stood there, waiting, like she was a client he'd forgotten he had scheduled. Sophia swallowed hard, forcing the lump in her throat down, and took the final step into his space. Up close, she caught his scent, cedar, river air, and something clean and sharp, like cold rain. "Hello, Caleb," she whispered. "Sophia," he replied. He didn't reach out his hand. He didn't lean in for that polite social kiss. He just said my name, flat and courteous, like I was some distant acquaintance you run into in the cereal aisle and barely recognize. Sophia flinched inside, but she kept her smile glued on anyway. She stepped closer, sliding into my space, breathing in that crisp, success smell on me like she was trying to inhale confidence off my skin. "You look incredible, Caleb," she said, dropping her voice into that intimate tone she used to save for late nights and closed doors. "I saw the article. The Architect of Silence. It fits you." "It's just a headline," I said, taking a sip of sparkling water. My eyes drifted over her shoulder for a second, checking the time on my watch, one that definitely wasn't the Patek Philippe she'd once given me. Then I looked back at her. "Why are you here, Sophia?" The bluntness threw her. Old me would have tiptoed around the question, terrified of sounding rude. I didn't anymore. "I wanted to see you," she said, letting her voice shake just enough to feel real. "I wanted to say. I'm sorry. About how things ended. About Nathan." I finally focused on her fully. And my eyes didn't soften the way she expected them to. They were clear. Dark. Cold. Empty of the warmth she remembered. "There's nothing to apologize for," I said. "Yes there is," she insisted quickly, reaching for my sleeve. I didn't yank away, but my arm went stiff instantly, like stone. I was stupid, Caleb. I was chasing something shiny because I was afraid of settling down. But Nathan, he's a monster. She swallowed and looked up at me like she was begging. "He didn't know me. Not like you did." Her eyes started to shine with tears, and I could tell she was waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to say I know, or I missed you, or even how could you. Instead I said, quietly, "I don't know you, Sophia." It hit the air and just hung there. The low hum of the jazz band kept playing behind us, but that sentence was louder than all of it. "What?" she whispered. "I knew a version of you," I continued, calm, so calm it sounded cruel. "But the woman who laughed at me while I was crying in our bedroom." I paused. "That's who you really are." Sophia blinked, confusion mixing with panic. "And honestly," I added, "I should thank you." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Thank me?" "If you hadn't been so cruel that night," I said evenly, "I might have stayed. I might have tried to fix it. I might have spent the rest of my life trying to be enough for you." I leaned in slightly, not intimate, just direct. "Your cruelty set me free, Sophia." Then I let the words settle. "It was the kindest thing you ever did." I set my glass down on a passing tray like this was just another ordinary conversation. "Caleb, please," she choked out. And then the tears finally came, hot, real, messy. "I'm drowning," she whispered. "My firm is failing. I'm alone. I miss us. Can't we just get coffee? Talk?" I watched her cry. I watched tears roll down her face and ruin the perfect makeup she'd worked so hard on. And I watched it all with a kind of detached calm, almost clinical. I remembered how her tears used to destroy me, how I would have done anything just to make her stop hurting. Back then, I would have burned the world down just to see her smile again. Now, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Just a mild desire to be somewhere else. I can't, I said. Then I gestured across the room. A woman stood there with kind eyes and a bright smile, the lead landscape designer on the project. She was waving at me, waiting. My life is full, Sophia, I said quietly. There's no space in it for ghosts. I adjusted my cuffs, like closing the final button on a chapter of my life. Take care of yourself, I told her. Then I turned around and walked away. My stride was steady, long and confident. I moved toward the warmth of my colleagues, toward the woman waiting for me, toward the future I'd built with my own 2 hands. I didn't glance back a single time. Sophia stood frozen in the middle of the crowded room as people streamed around her like water around a rock. Slowly, she turned toward the huge glass wall overlooking the Hudson. The pavilion was designed to catch the city lights, so the glass reflected everything like a mirror against the dark river. And there she was. Midnight blue dress. Perfect hair. Expensive beauty that was starting to fade at the edges. And tears. Big, ugly, uncontrollable tears sliding down her face. She wasn't just crying for the husband she lost. She was crying for the life she burned. And for the sick, crushing realization that I didn't leave to punish her. I left because I outgrew her. 3 years ago, she laughed while I broke. Now, surrounded by applause and champagne meant for me, she covered her mouth to hold in a sob, watching the man she once called invisible vanish into a life where she no longer existed.